I'm so glad to be with you here today. I'm Carolyn Weber, and with me is my coworker Rose Spears, who's behind the camera today. And we are celebrating Women's History Month by highlighting the life of Freeda Hartzell, champion shooter. Several years ago, we received an archival donation that included a diary, a poster from Spearfish Carnival, and it also included the photograph of a beautiful young girl. And all of these objects centered around Freeda Hartzell. And I thought, well, who is Freeda Hartzell? I'd never heard of her before. So of course, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to do some research into Freeda. And so today I'm going to share with you some of the many things I found out about this wonderful woman. Freeda was born December 20th, 1891 to James and Mary Hartzell. And the family lived on the family farm down in Chadron, Nebraska. And the father, James, was what I like to call a dude cowboy. And by that I mean he performed in and managed several Wild West shows. And he was an experienced shooter. In fact, he was so good that the Weekly Pioneer Times, dated July 3rd, 1902, states that James Hartzell was considered to be one of the most expert pistol shots in the world and was willing to meet anyone in a trial of skill. So I think that sums up pretty well how good he was at shooting. And then for whatever reason, the family decided to move from Chadron to Deadwood. And they lived here from 1897 to 1905. And James would frequently have to go on business trips for his Wild West shows, and he would often take Mary and Freeda with him. And I mean, can you imagine what a childhood that would have been for Freeda? I mean, she got the opportunity to interact with and observe people from all different backgrounds and cultures, and watch them perform some of the most talented and skilled and able performances of people with so many different talents. What an education. And in addition, she learned to shoot. And boy, could that girl shoot. I am not kidding. She started performing when she was just 11 years old to public. Just 11. Now, if I remember correctly, I think that's about the age of a 6th grader, which to me, that's pretty young. And then she had the honor of a lifetime, you guys. She got to perform at the World's Fair in St. Louis, Missouri. And mind you, this was only the 13th public competition or exhibition she had ever been in. And she was at the World's Fair. And do you know who she was partnered with in performing? She was partnered with Will Rogers, who was showing off his trick roping skills, and Freeda was exhibiting her shooting abilities, obviously. And boy, she could shoot a rifle, a shotgun, and a revolver, and probably anything else you put into her tiny little girl hands. And when she was shooting, her father would throw up a series of glass balls into the air, and Freeda would shoot at them, and rarely, if ever, did she miss. I mean, the girl was that good. But don't take my word for it. Here is what the Weekly Times had to say on January 1st, 1903 about our girl Freeda. She said, Miss Freeda, who is only a little girl, is an expert rifle and pistol shot and can duplicate anything which Annie Oakley ever did and do better shooting than that young woman who has a worldwide reputation as a rifle shot. In fact, Miss Freeda can beat her with the 6-shooter. How's that for being a young, very young teenage girl? And you are being said that your skills are better than the world famous Annie Oakley? That's something to live up to. But where I really get to learn about Freeda is through her diary. And her diary contains, it's over 100 pages long, and it was written in 1905 when she lived in Deadwood. And I learned right away that she played the piano nearly every day, and she read the Bible nearly every night before going to bed. And that when her father was frequently gone for even short periods of time or extended travel with his Wild West shows, she missed him dearly. She was very emotional about that. And then, unfortunately for this young girl, her mother was frequently ill and bedridden for days on end, which left Freeda doing most of the household chores, which, you know what, this girl never once complained about that in her diary. And then I learned that, in May of 1905, she was to perform at the Spearfish Carnival. She was one of the main attractions there, and there was quite a crowd at the carnival because Freeda was well known in the area, and people liked to follow her career and watch her develop in her shooting skills. So, when the carnival was over, they headed back to Deadwood. In tow with them was a little kitten. Freeda had found a small kitten at the carnival and asked her mother if she could have it. Her mom said, sure. So she brought the little kitten home, but then just a couple days later, 2 neighbor dogs got into the yard and attacked this kitten. Didn't quite kill it, but wounded it severely. So she took the kitten, scooped it up to her bedroom, placed him on some blankets that she had laid out for the kitten, and tried to nurse it back to health. But it was not to be. The next day, her dear little kitten passed away, and she was heartbroken. She was so terribly sad. I mean, her sadness comes through in the pages of this diary like you would not believe. But then she takes the little kitten's body, digs a small grave, buries it in the grave, and then covers the top of the grave with a variety of wildflowers that she had found around the property. So that was a sad moment in this little girl's life. But then, just a couple months later in July, she writes of a really fun event that she went to. She and several of her freshman classmates had gotten together to have a party. And they were lucky enough to have two ice chests full of ice cream, which they stowed away in the woodshed. Well, after a while, everybody's like, hey, let's have some of that ice cream y'all been talking about. So they sent some boys down to the woodshed to get one of the ice cream freezers and bring it back up. Well, the boys got down there and discovered that one of their ice cream freezers was gone. They found out that it was the sophomores who were the culprits who had taken that ice cream chest. And so Freeda writes that, we sent some of our boys after them, but they got away. So they were foiled once again, the freshmen were, by the sophomore class. And I think there was a bit of a class-friendly class rivalry going on between the sophomores and the freshmen. So that was kind of a fun thing. Then just a couple days later, Freeda writes that the family is going to Chadron. And I thought they were going for just a short vacation in the summertime to see relatives down there. And when she's there, she still writes in her diary, she says that she's so happy to be with her grandparents and her aunts and uncles and cousins. And man, she is having the time of her life riding ponies and horses and playing with all kinds of farm animals. And then, November of that same year, in the diary, she writes that she's attending classes in Chadron. She's in Latin, general history, some science classes, and she's also preparing for an oratorical competition that's coming up. So obviously, the family never came back to Deadwood. They stayed in Chadron. But what I love most about this diary, what I took away from it most was there's all these great events and fun things that she talks about. But you know what I noticed was she lacks attention to her shooting skills and her Wild West performances. Rarely does she mention those. I think there's 3 mentions in all of those events that were such a big part of her life. And to me, what this says is that she's not self-absorbed, she's not a braggart, she's kind of modest and humble about it. And that really was refreshing, and I liked that best about Freeda, I think. So then, they're down in Chadron, right? And Freeda and James are still performing frequently in Wild West shows that are down there. But at this same time, those fun Wild West shows are waning in popularity. Other forms of entertainment were taking their place. Then we find out that in June 29th of 1911, Freeda marries a young man named Guy Romine. He was a freight conductor for the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. And in addition to that, he was also, they also opened an automobile repair shop, which, you know, pretty good thinking at that time. They were ahead of the curve, really. And it was pretty successful down there. So they were involved with that. And then in 1914, on it was December 2nd. December 2nd, gosh, sorry guys. December 2nd, 1914, they welcome a daughter named Catherine into their family. And so their family is complete at that time. And then we fast forward just 2 years further into 1916, and we catch up with Freeda. And what do you think she's doing? Oh, remember I mentioned other forms of entertainment? Freeda is starring in a movie. And what do you think the movie was called? Wild Bill and Calamity Jane in the days of 75 and 76. How fitting and appropriate is that for both Freeda and for us who live here in Deadwood. I love that connection. So here is Freeda. She is, yep, that's Freeda right there. She is the starring character of Calamity Jane. And Freeda's mother, Mary, was also in the movie, and she starred as Calamity Jane's mother, which again, isn't that appropriate. But I must say, this movie is far from historically accurate. They took a great deal of liberties with the lives of Calamity Jane and Wild Bill. But I'm sure Freeda and Mary had a good time being in this movie. So then, after that, guys, I kind of lose track of Freeda and what she's doing. I don't catch up with her again until 1930 when I discovered that she and Guy have gotten a divorce. And then a couple years later, several years actually, Freeda moves to Indianapolis, Indiana, where her daughter Catherine was living, and Freeda gets a job there as a sales clerk at a drugstore. And then in 1964, at the age of 72, Freeda Hartzell Romaine has passed away. And I discovered this by a small obituary that I ran across in the Indianapolis Star. And when I mean small, I mean tiny. It was just 64 words in length. I thought that was a little odd, and I was a little disappointed about that because I thought here's a person that had such a fabulous background and was so very well accomplished in many things. She was a great shooter, she was in a movie, she was a mother, and it never made mention of any of those things. All the obituary talked about was when and where the funeral for her was going to be. And I thought that that was kind of unusual that a life well lived had come down to just 64 words. But who knows? I mean, maybe that's the way Freeda wanted it. If you remember, I thought that she was rather humble and modest and didn't, brag about herself for much. So maybe that's the way she wanted her obituary to be. Who knows? But you know what? We know the rest of the story about Freeda. We know what an interesting and fulfilled life she had. And so I hope you enjoyed learning about the life of Freeda Hartzell today. And if you want to ever know more about other people in Deadwood and our community and its history, please, I would welcome you to come to the Homestake Adams Research and Cultural Center. Also be sure to visit the Adams Museum, the Days of 76 Museum, and on April 1st, you will be able to once again take tours at the historic Adams House. And, of course, you can take tours at the Brothel Deadwood on Main Street. So thank you so very much for being with Rose and I today, and happy Women's History Month.